on the show today, David Berceli, legendary founder of TRE, Trauma Releasing Exercises and Tension Releasing Exercises. David has an extensive background in working, I believe, in humanitarian sector in areas of conflict. And having just come back from our own project in Ukraine, teaching trauma teachers, I thought, you know what, it would be good almost to debrief, really, but to discuss it with people who really knew. And there's out of the trauma teachers out there, many of them have done most of their work in sort of fairly benign first world environments. And I thought, who's been on the badass edge of things that will probably get it, who I can probably get some good advice from? And David was absolutely top of the list. So David, welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to talk to you again.
Super happy to see you. I've been back for a week or so now. But I want to first sort of go back in time in your life before you taught trauma releasing exercises. Like, what were you doing before that?
Well, I actually was working with a nonprofit organization, and we were working with refugees from war, political violence, or natural disasters mostly. So I worked mostly with large populations of traumatized people and trying to figure out how to get large communities or families to come back down, reground themselves, and start living a healthy life again. Many times, actually, it was even in the middle of the political violence. We had to do it in process while there was still political violence going on and bombings or shootings and that sort of thing. But it was still like, okay, how do we bring our bodies back to a place that we feel safe inside, although we might not feel safe externally? But there are ways to access the safety inside the body, which, Mark, in all reality, it helps you be more logical, more reasonable. It helps you understand, okay, what do I have to do next? Different from being in shock or being in some sort of startled response or slightly dissociated. I always kept people to say, no, let's stay grounded so that we can make reasonable decisions on what's the next best move for us to make.
Yes, one of my students said, hey, how do I, convince soldiers to do this? And I said, well, sometimes the argument is, well, if we do trauma releasing work, we can come back down from combat so we can talk to our families and connect again, go into that connection kind of, peace mode. But that's not what they're thinking about right now in Ukraine. So I said, no, this will help you fight better. This will help you see clearer. This will help you make better decisions. This will also help you be kinder as a soldier, but it will also help you just be more effective because your modern fighting is not about hitting someone with a rock. It's about intelligent decision making. And, if you're going to fire a javelin missile, you better not be shaking too much. You better not be in a rage, but actually thinking clearly. Right.
Well, actually, when we had American soldiers that were still in Iraq and some in Afghanistan I worked with, they literally would go out on their mission. They'd be gone maybe 6 or 7 hours. When they came back, and they were what they call behind the line, so they were back in safety, they would do TRE to discharge from the day all of the anxiety they had. Otherwise, all they do is build up PTSD symptoms for a year or for as long as they're in battle. Then they come home and they bring it home with them. And so you literally can't process it every day. I know this because when I was living in war, this one happened to be in Lebanon, I think, we were being shelled by mortar shells every day. And we would be shelled for like 2 or 3 hours, and then everything would stop for a little bit. And I would just do TRE because I would just calm myself back down, come back into myself and look at myself and say, okay, you're safe. That was terrifying, but you're safe. Calm down, bring your system back into a healthy state so I can both keep it physically healthy as well as psycho-emotionally healthy. And so it was just like a roller coaster. It was just a more intense roller coaster. But even soldiers in Iraq, this really shocked me. One of them one time called me from their tent and said, I'm doing TRE with my buddies. We got one of your books and this is what's going on. And this is so funny. He's on his cell phone in a tent with 4 guys and they're all doing TRE together. So that's how easily accessible it is. But like you said, Mark, remarkably practical, on site, I know it doesn't sound right, but it's not like you're doing yoga or something like that, or trying to do meditation. You're literally getting your nervous system to discharge. And you already know TRE, you do it mindlessly. You don't have to concentrate. And so I taught soldiers how to do the buddy system, where one of the guys would tremor and the other one would watch as a support system. And then they'd reverse those roles. And it worked extremely well for them.
Yeah, no, I was doing it pretty much every day while in Ukraine. And just to give you some idea, the training we were doing there, I'd say 50% of the time we were in the bomb shelter. So we were in a nice hotel, and 50% of the time sirens were going off. We had to relocate to the bomb shelter, which was a sort of cold, dark, people hear bomb shelter, they might think some state of the art, military facility. But in this case, it's just a dirty, dark, cold car park underneath the hotel.
They usually are. That's right. Yes.
And what about this idea of doing work that actually in danger? Because a lot of the classic trauma books will say, first, get out of the danger. And I'm like, yeah, that's nice if you can,
right?
Leave the abusive partner or whatever. But that's just not possible in those situations.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, this is what's really interesting. I was behind sandbags. I wasn't doing the shooting, the soldiers were, but I got caught in the middle of the struggle. And so I was behind the sandbag. So the soldiers were shooting. And this is what's really important, Mark. When you're shooting a rifle, this is taught in all the military, when you're shooting a rifle or even a handgun, you learn how to control your breath, because you want to hold your breath at the moment you're going to pull the trigger, because that's when you can make your body most still. So literally, military are trained already right in the middle of combat how to control themselves, how to control their body. Well, TRE is the same thing. Like you said, you don't want a shaky hand when you're holding a weapon, but you can discharge that shaking within a minute or two, and then you've got a steady hand and you can shoot your weapon. Now, literally, this can be done right in the field.
Yeah. I should probably say to listeners, we might talk about some fairly harsh things actually on this episode. So sort of, warnings for those people kind of listening to this. But as you say, the shaking can be done. I saw people crossing the border as refugees shaking. Absolutely. And actually my colleague, who is my driver from Poland, who isn't trauma trained, said, oh, is that person got Parkinson's? I said, perfect. No, that person's having a trauma response. And now they're crossing the border into Poland. There's probably a bit more safety in there. That's being
right.
raised.
And so their body naturally begins to discharge when the safety starts to be introduced, because there's such a high adrenal charge. The adrenaline's so high. The only thing the shaking is doing is discharging the adrenaline in the bloodstream, because it's dangerous. High adrenal charges are very dangerous to the human body to keep them in there for too long. So the ones that were tremoring, Mark, were the healthiest ones. The ones that were already in a freeze state and not tremoring are the ones who are going to exhibit more post-traumatic stress symptoms later on.
One question we had, my students are already, it's only a week or so later, my students are delivering workshops all over the country because they really want to, and they're keen to help. We've got the result, we've given them the salary, which is fantastic. One of them, sent me a message saying, hey, I'm working with soldiers, and they say what to do if someone freezes up while holding a machine gun. How do you help them unfreeze? Because what they found was soldiers were freezing in quite dangerous positions. Like, hey, we've got to get out of here. We got, mortar shells coming in, whatever it is. And then their colleagues were frozen while literally on the front lines with a gun.
Right.
How would you respond to that?
That's sad, because that happens to a lot of young soldiers, actually. I mean, these kids are 18 years old. They're in a life or death threat that they didn't know 2 weeks ago they were going to be in this kind of environment. They're truly shocked and scared to death. And if you've ever had to shoot somebody for the first time, as many of these kids are doing, I mean, they're shooting at a human being. That's horribly traumatizing. And think of this, those old movies that we had to do, that when people were hysterical or something, we would slap them in the face and say, snap out of it. Those were those comedies, those old comedies. Well, that literally is what you have to do. You've got to shock the body immediately to bring it back to the present moment, because a dissociated state, they are now in some other place, or this frozen state, their brain has gone someplace where their body is not. You have to punch them or bring them back into the body really hard. I used to do this when I worked with severely traumatized people who had been severely traumatized as a child over time, and they would come to me for therapy. I would have to do something to shock them back in their body to bring them present again. And so we've done this out on the field. You know, it's sort of a buddy thing. We don't like to make it trauma, but I would slap the soldier on his back really hard and say, stay here, go for it, be aware, stay awake. And just the hard slap on the shoulder is what did it.
Yeah, they were worried about doing that while people were actually holding loaded weapons. Right. So I suppose you can kind of escalate it from gentle. And the problem is that window of tolerance can be quite small, and people can go from non-reactive to having a sudden response, which can be, you know, really quite dangerous if they're holding a loaded gun. So I guess there's a sort of escalation process in that, right?
Yeah, you can do that. See, unless, of course, it's a life or death threat right at that moment. You want them back right at that moment. But yes, you can escalate it. It's so simple. You could just squeeze their arms or you pull their ear, rub their face, anything like that. All it is about somatically bringing the person's consciousness back into the organism, into the body. And that can be done in many, many different ways.
Yeah. We talked a lot on the course about co-regulation, and you know that your biggest gift you were bringing was your own nervous system. You know, my students kept asking for techniques, and I was teaching them various techniques of different, you know, modalities. The best stuff we could do. As an EMDR teacher there, I was teaching tapping, different things. But I said, look, the best resource, we started every day with metta meditation and shaking. And I said, this is just for you, but every day, the best resource you can bring is yourself. And that nervous system is going to calm people around you.
Exactly right. You can have one person in a room that could calm down the entire room if they are calm. The way they speak their voice, the way their face look or their eyes look. And the exact opposite is true, Mark. You could have one hysterical person in the room and they can disrupt the entire room. See, we do have a co-regulatory process.
Yeah, we actually had a weekend. The training was 10 days. And the first 2 days we assessed people and we removed those people we thought had too much chronic hyperarousal, because we thought a few kind of hyperaroused apples are going to kind of impact the whole training. And we had 100 people there, more or less. And
that's exactly right. And that was a great thing to do, because they can disrupt an entire room. And
it was like 100 people. And the other thing is, the moment they first trusted me, I saw was when the first alarm went off and everyone else went into panic and they're just about to run for the stairs, which is really dangerous when you've got a lot of people in a room. And I just said, everyone, we've got time to take 2 breaths. Okay, now we're going to walk to the bomb shelter. I'll be at the front. Oksana will be at the back. And just being that little bit calmer, because, you know, I haven't been in it as much as a lot of people there, as anything. I don't want to claim any special powers. And they were like, okay, this guy's a leader. And after that, the whole training went a lot more smooth.
Those are the best military leaders that you ever find, the ones who stay calm and relaxed. They're logical and reasonable, even in the midst of fighting, or in your case, an alarm like that. But they're the ones that say to you, okay, wait, hold on. Everybody breathe. We're going to be fine. We're going to do this. Let's do it in an orderly fashion. That works because people who just got hyper aroused, they need that to bring them back. And right there, it can do it quite easily. See, this is really interesting, Mark, because you've now had the experience. I'm fascinated at how easy it really is to bring people back to a grounded, centered place. We think that's complicated and hard, and we have all these rules and systems. No, human beings relate to human beings. We're at the basic level of humanity. It's actually quite easier to work from that level.
Yeah. And what would you say around this really sort of catastrophic level of trauma? Because so much of the trauma work that's been developed by some people I really love and respect, a lot of the people who've had on the show, has been done with, you know, people in America who maybe were in a car accident, which is bad. I've been in a car accident. Maybe they were mugged. Maybe it was developmental trauma. They, you know, weren't sort of looked after as a kid. And again, that little ones get overwhelmed, that can lead to shock. And, you know, I'm not belittling anyone's trauma. And some of my students are on the ground in Bucha, for example, right now, where there's been real atrocities. You know?
Right.
Well, one of my students came to me and said, I just taught a class and everyone's scared of being raped.
Right.
This is now reality in their part of Ukraine. This is a real threat and a genuine
Right.
threat. You know, what do I tell them, kind of thing. Do you think there's a difference between these sort of catastrophic, you know, daily shelling, genocides, this kind of thing? How is that different? How does that impact the work we need to be doing compared to the sort of standard 20 years after a difficult childhood or a car accident kind of stuff that you'll come across much more commonly in Britain, United States, Canada?
Yeah. In some ways, Mark, it is not different at all for the human body, because it's just taking up whatever the incident is. How do I survive? Where is safety? What do I do to keep myself sort of healthy inside my nervous system, mostly, and the adrenal glands? And so the human body has already got this all regulated. It's the psyche that then becomes the problem. Because, and I don't mean to belittle this, yes, they're afraid of being raped, but now their brain is in the future that something terrible will happen, different from the present moment where that isn't happening. And so it's constantly bring them back to the present moment, because quite frankly, they will be more logical and reasonable. If they get into a situation of a threat of potentially being raped, they might be able to get themselves out of it because of the way they behave or the way they think. But if they're into shock or terror or trauma already, they are less capable of knowing how to escape the dangerous situation for themselves and bring themselves back to safety. So it's imperative to live in the present moment, not in the future terror. It doesn't help.
Yeah. So I said to them about any kind of body work, you know, we did every day, we did some kind of movement work as well as shaking work and, you know, meditation. I said, look, if you come back to the body, most of the fears and things that you find scary aren't happening right now. You know, most of the, you know, I remember there was different alarms went off, and some days it would be like, oh, there's an alarm, no big deal, because I was imagining, oh, this is bullshit, this is the fifth one today. And other days an alarm would go off and I'd be terrified because something had been blown up not far away. And I was thinking, oh shit, this could be the real deal, you know? And because a lot of the time it's false alarms and what have you. And and I remember thinking, oh, this is the same alarm. It's literally the same alarm. It's my head that's creating the fear, right?
Absolutely.
Like every single day. And I mean, the tone of the alarm, and I guess there's also the panic of the other people. There were days when I was around groups of people and I could feel that anxiety there. And even when people would go, you know, we were eating sushi in restaurants some days, you know, but it was a strange situation to be in. It wasn't like some of the African place, something. But then I remember as soon as we went across the border to Poland, my driver, he was delivering refugees, and our whole nervous system just went, oh.
Yeah.
You know, we just noticed the difference from that low-level trauma that you pick up, plus there's what you're thinking about. There's sort of two different types, isn't there?
Right.
Really?
See, that's a great example. You were in the middle of war, but then you went out and you had sushi. So now you're sitting in a restaurant. And that was the whole point. We just have to work more to say, okay, I'm in a restaurant, I'm eating sushi. The whole rest of the world does not exist in the reality of my body right now. It's actually safe, it's being fed, it's being healthy. Keep yourself in the present moment. That's the trick, and that's really hard to do. Because like you said, even though you try doing that, when you finally cross the border into Poland, you then even saw, oh, my nervous system, I thought it was downregulated, but now it's even gone down more.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was calmer than many of the people I was around because of my practices and experience and maybe length of time I've been out there. And then it wasn't until I got back home I realized I was actually pretty wired compared to some of the people in Brighton. I was walking down the street yesterday just absorbing the normality and going, okay, it's safe, everyone's having a coffee, everyone's chill, they're in play, rest and digest. Okay, just taking that last sort of 5% off. And there is something about being able to be back in the normal world, in inverted commas. And I know some people, you know, they get addicted to the stress or they find it isolating, like, hey, I do notice I was really drawn to call you, for example, David. Like, David will get it,
Right.
and other people, I'm like, oh, they're not going to get it. But for me, I had enough healthy practices that I was able to land fairly quickly and come back really healthy, and good co-regulation with Pietra, my driver, when I got home, and good supervision. But not everybody has the benefits of these things, I'm aware.
Yeah, but see, what you're talking about is you had certain things in place while you were in the danger zone, and you practiced those. And even though you did, this is so funny how the nervous system sneaks up on us, and it gets a little higher. We think this is normal now. We came from here. Now we think this is normal. When you got back home to England, then you realize, holy cow, I'm still sort of wired a bit. Yeah. But do you know how wired you would have been had you not done anything?
I saw it with some of my colleagues or friends, people around me there. I really saw it, and it was quite shocking in some cases.
Yeah,
quite disturbing. And I think the other thing is sometimes it's insidious. Like Pietro, Polish Pete, my driver and very, very good friend. I was his best man years ago in Poland, and he drove me. And I thought, I'll do this with him because I feel much safer with him, much more. He's a tough guy, and we get on really well, good co-regulation. And he didn't know anything about trauma. But he is a simple guy, and hasn't had psychological education, and he'd been delivering refugees backwards and forwards while I was doing the training. He thought it'd just be useful, kind guys. He's like driving people backwards and forwards. Medicine's one way, refugees the other. And after the end of it, he said, "I don't feel great, Mark." He says, "Now nothing bad has happened. I haven't been bombed." And he said, "I don't really understand." And he says, "I said, oh, it's because you've been around these people with a lot of trauma." And he'd been sitting in a car in a van crammed with people. So really body on body for 8, 10, 12 hours. It takes a long time to cross the border. And I said, look, you've picked up on it from people's bodies. Yeah. And that's why you don't feel great. And he didn't really have the vocabulary for it, but it was talking about numbing and hyperarousal. And I said, I think I'll take a week off. And he went and just took a week in the countryside with his dogs, running around with his dogs, and, exercise the body in nature, co-regulation with dogs like humans. And lo and behold, a week later, he's fine. But it was so interesting to see someone who didn't have maybe the language we would have say, how has this happened to me? Because he didn't get that it's insidious.
Right. It's interesting. We've almost prevented people from being able to heal themselves by creating such a huge language and dialogue, and we've made this so cognitive, and you have to be trained, etc. But even if your friend hadn't talked to you like that, he was feeling it, so he knew something was wrong. And look at his solution. I'm going to go out to the country and play with my dogs. Do you see how normal this should be? He
didn't need to hear about ventral vagal, he didn't need to hear about any of that stuff. He got it. He asked me as a sort of friend and expert, like, is this what I'm planning a good idea? I was like, yes, Pete. And, spending time with me was a good idea. I talked about a few things, but he didn't. One of my students in Ukraine is teaching 10-year-old kids about this stuff. She plays games, and we have a traffic light thing we use for different nervous system states. They don't need complicated terminology.
Not at all. We've complicated it so much that it makes people, they think they don't have access to it. But look what happened before we had all these books on traumas. People were going through wars, and how were they recovering? They knew enough to go sit by themselves, to be alone. They could feel it inside. I want solitude. Family, this is different too. We're in sort of nuclear families now. Yeah. But families of many nations, they're still all sitting around with grandma and grandpa and the aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, and they're having some sort of family gathering. That whole socializing itself is wonderful. And like you said, if they're farmers and they're all taking care of animals, they're actually grounding just from that. See, my whole point is that human body already knows, we're genetically encoded to know we're going to be traumatized on this planet. We can survive it. We can recover from it. And some people feel they evolve from it, meaning they become more sensitive to life when they face death, as an example. And so, but we're genetically encoded, Mark. That's what people aren't getting. We don't have to be trained.
We don't need a PhD. And it's certainly, I think there's maybe a sensitivity we've lost. Like, having done your work for some years now, I notice the urge to shake. Like, for me, it's almost like I need a pee. It's not literally
Absolutely.
the same, but I feel it in my body, and I go, oh yeah, I'll do some shaking at the gym today. Oh yeah, I might go dancing instead. Actually, I feel like dancing instead of shaking. But I know when I've got a physical discharge that's
Yes.
needed, like when I come home from somewhere like this, I can feel it.
Right. And this tremor mechanism in TRE, along with other modalities that you use, all they do is help you develop a greater sensitivity inside the human body so that you might not know why you want to do it, but you're right. You just say, well, I want to dance. Well, I want to move. I want to be in silence. I want to tremor. All of those instinctual reactions, what we call instincts, we're designed to know those already.
Yeah.
If we would just affirm those to people, and had the opportunity, this is one of the things that people don't have. Like when they come back, they have to go right to work, as an example. So they come from a war zone, they have to go right to work. They're not even allowed to be sensitive to feel what does their body really need to recover.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky. When I got back, I was going to be seeing my mentees, who I got on very well with. They're very relaxed. But I very deliberately asked one of my best friends to be an assistant, just because I wanted him around to make things easy, but I also co-regulation. And then the mentee said, okay, on the middle day, let's do some activities. So I went, okay, great. So we did Aikido, which is strongly ritualized with people I've known for years, and I feel very safe there. We did swimming in the sea, releasing in nature. We did dancing in an old church in Brighton, where I've danced for 10 years. And people have been going to that church for 1,000 years to sing and move and get things out in different ways, according to whatever the culture of the time. And we did all these activities together, and lo and behold, like I just felt a million times better afterwards. And there were still times when I was like, I'd rather not be around people right now. I wish I hadn't had this in my diary, kind of thing, as well. So
right. But see, the thing that was interesting is these weren't actually thoughts in your head. They were sensations coming from the body, informing the brain. And that's why we want to keep people actually out of their brain, because they'll just go into all these theories. But if you're just feeling your body and you're giving it permission, like you said, to dance or to run, to be in silence or to be with people, the organism will lead you through that process naturally and bring itself back to health. We have to be able to feel its intuitive guidance. And then obviously we have to have the opportunity to follow it.
I want to come back to something you said earlier, though, because while we, the skill of feeling, building the skill up, I've spent a life building that skill up, so I'm in a lucky place there. We can fool ourselves. Like, one of the things I said when I got back is, like, I said to my colleagues, tell me if I'm weird, because I feel fine. Tell me if I'm inappropriate, tell me if my jokes are even more off than normal. Tell me if I'm pushy, tell me if, like I'm really quick, and I'm normally pretty quick. And I just said, just give me some feedback here if something's a bit off, because the problem is our system, our perception, cognition, and self-perception gets warped, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely it does. Like you said, you thought you were calm until after you crossed into Poland, then you realized, oh, I dropped down. But there's still more to drop down. And you're right, you were still hyper when you returned back to England, but it was normalized for you. Now your baseline has come up to here, and you think that's normal because you can't sense who you were like before. You think, oh, I'm the same person now. So having these objective people, that's what's good about families and friends and colleagues. They could say, no, your humor is too black right now. It never used to be that way, because black humor often comes out of war, actually.
Yes. My Balkan students seem to be on the same page humor-wise, and it's when you're laughing with the Balkan people, something's up. But okay, I mean,
the same thing happened when I would work with military people. They can tell jokes amongst themselves, but those jokes weren't appropriate to bring home to family and friends because they couldn't get it. But because I lived in war, I actually found them funny too, because in some way I understood them. But black humor is one of the hallmarks of somebody who is still slightly overactive in their nervous system.
Do you think it's like him as a good positive coping mechanism then, or do you think it's slightly like, hey, there's still some work to be done, like when there's that black humor? I mean, or could it, I sometimes feel like it could be either one of those things, healthy or
It's
unhealthy.
a positive reaction temporarily. It shouldn't last your whole life long. Like I can still laugh at black humor, but I don't use it. And I know when it's black humor, when a soldier's using it to me, see? So I don't do it any longer. It's a coping mechanism that works really well. But like all coping mechanisms, you must grow out of them if you want to go back to being healthy.
Yeah, and I'm not going to bring those jokes to my niece next time I see her at the family get together. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And in this situation in Ukraine, I'm guessing you're following on the news. I mean, is it sort of, you know, for you who's been in Lebanon and Africa, different places, is it more of the same to you, or do you think there's anything particularly different here? I mean, it's a fairly high intensity conflict compared to Afghanistan, I would say, you know, in terms of the amount of kind of carnage and deaths and bombing and things. Also, there's this weird modern kind of context, you know, you've got a generation who have done a lot of sort of social media and travel, and, you know, things are quite connected. Like I was literally on video phone to one of my colleagues while she was in a car fleeing in Kiev. And, you know, I said, I can't talk now, you know, we're getting shot at. And it's like, whoa, okay. You know, that level of connectivity. Is there anything that you see that's a bit different than past experience?
It's all relatively different. It's like we took an old type of human behavior and we brought it into 2022. It doesn't work. Like you said, I'm watching it on TikTok, for God's sakes. Teenage kids are showing, here comes a soldier, a Russian soldier down the street, or there goes a Ukrainian running, and these kids are talking to each other on TikTok. So you have social media. But the other thing too, is this happened so quickly. It was really a shock to everybody. All of a sudden, there's this antiquated method of brutality brought into what we call the Western world immediately, and the consciousness of the different generations involved is completely different. We are looking at something brand new.
Yeah, that's new, isn't it? And I mean, there was a build up to it in terms of Crimea and, you know, the Russian occupation of eastern regions. You know, I met my wife 7 years ago as a result of some of the conflicts going on. However, there was this sudden, quick escalation. Like, no, I wasn't predictive. You know, people in Kiev, like, they're not, I don't know, someone in Congo who's been in a low-level conflict for a long time, or in Israel there's been conflict for a long time. They were people just doing normal, you know, working on their laptops, doing social media. Yeah. And I met people in Krakow who were refugees, and they sort of had their laptops, and they were like, how did I get here? And they were able to take their jobs with them. So some of them weren't like refugees, how you might imagine. You know, there's a modernness to it, and this archaic quality. Dictators launching tank invasions. It just doesn't seem like something from this century.
Exactly right. So this is brand new for all of us. We're all trying to figure out how to negotiate this in our own minds. Even NATO, the Western European countries, everyone's all confused all of a sudden. They don't know how to deal with this thing. But like you said, it's an antiquated method of brutality, but it's being brought into a whole new realm where it doesn't belong anymore. And so I think we're learning something from this, honestly.
And also there is a much higher level of trauma awareness in this conflict.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's been, I was in Ukraine when 7 years ago when the Maidan happened, and even therapists knew nothing about trauma. That's how I met my wife, was doing work. And I was like, hey, I'm not that big an expert on trauma. They're like, you know much more than most therapists here. Now the level's really quite high. And Mark Sana, my colleague, the MDR, really quite high. I think there's going to be, it's very young people, for example, like my students have been watching the embodiment conference with Peter Beans, Tim Porges, and you, and all these great people. And they're hanging out in Thailand doing yoga and meditation. Like literally one of my students came in from a contact improv festival abroad, flew in for the training, like flew into the war zone. So this is from an embodied practice background. And that wasn't the case when I was in Afghanistan or Sierra Leone.
Right.
My students there weren't contact improv teachers who'd been meditating for 10 years.
I've had so many people contact me, and I've had to get them in contact with people in Poland and Greece and Turkey, where all the refugees are going. So people are like flying into the place. Even Americans are, some of them are flying in right into Ukraine because they want to help Ukrainians fight, that sort of thing. But you're right. It is a global, in one sense, it's a global war consciously. Everyone knows about it. Everyone has access to it. Even people in China, even in Shanghai, they're locked up in their rooms right now, but they've got their phones or they've got their iPads or whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone is watching what's going on. And this is going to create something new. I'm certain of it, a new way to respond or a new way to participate. This is a global event, even though it's supposedly just in Ukraine and Russia. It truly is a global awareness war or violence going on. It's not isolated.
People just going, I'm not having it, all over the world.
Yes.
Whether they were British ex-soldiers going to fight, people like me going to do trauma work, people supporting economically. I hadn't ever seen such a unified response from around the world of people just going, no, none of that 20th century bullshit, no more.
Right.
That's the sense I've got from people.
Yes, this is that link between the 20th and the 21st century. We're saying, no, we are not that way any longer. This is not going to work. We're not accepting it. Now, we don't exactly know what that's going to come into, but it can be remarkably transformative for human consciousness, not just for a country or a certain group of people or an ethnic group of people. This is shifting human consciousness, and the human consciousness is this is no longer acceptable. That's profound. We've never done that before.
It's big. Okay, we need to wrap up fairly soon. It's kind of late here. I said to my PA, I'll speak to David anytime. Give me any time of day, I'll make it happen. Lastly, Zelensky. Let's talk about Zelensky. It's been very popular. Classic war leader in some ways. First thing he said when we invaded was, "We are not afraid." Right. And a lot of respect for the man, obviously putting himself and in harm's way. Much loved in many places, slightly deified even in some places.
Right. Yeah.
What's your sense of from a trauma point of view of this? We haven't had a sort of heroic. We don't imagine politicians as heroic leaders anymore. It's also slightly archaic, maybe in a good way, though, right?
Right. Well, first of all, he's on the front lines, so that's different than most military leaders. They're usually sitting in my country in Washington, D.C., and telling people on the front line what to do and how to behave. There are a couple things problematic, and I don't know him as well. I'm just going to talk about leaders in war in general. They also are traumatized. And unless we keep them grounded, they will start making decisions from a traumatized behavior that will not be the healthiest decisions on leading the country forward in how to bring resolution to this. And that's my big problem.
His trauma growing. He was a TV comedian. He was a TV comedian until fairly recently, an actor. And actually, though, he has intergenerational trauma, very likely he has Jewish family who are in the Holocaust, for example.
Right.
I think his father's brothers were killed in the Holocaust. So I'm not, I don't know his personal history, but he looked to me pretty untraumatized a couple of months ago. And now is really starting to show it.
See,
he must be seeing things that, every day he's hearing reports.
He's seeing and hearing, and he's taking it on himself. But he's trying to put up an image. Now think of that, Mark, if this were you, you're hearing the horrible atrocities that your nation is saying, please help us survive. So you have to take all that on, and then you have to realize, oh my God, I'm the one who's got to bring resolution and stop this. And so now he's got to split himself between the emotions that he's taking in and a behavior he's supposed to have to be this, like you said, savior of people. Right there's a split. It's a split consciously, it's a split emotionally. The guy's going to go through some really tough stuff. If someone doesn't do trauma therapy for him every day, then all he does is dissociate more and more, and his decisions are coming from the wrong place. Now, I'm not saying he's a bad guy, and I'm not saying this is easy for him.
Yeah, that's an incredibly difficult position. And also to maintain that classic masculine.
Absolutely.
It's so old
yeah.
school. A lot of Ukrainians I meet are like, we're so proud of our men. And even though there are women on the front lines as medics, and I think it's not quite as many as the Western media would say, but
Right.
it's the classic masculine role model has to be unfeeling, unreactive,
Yeah.
unafraid. And that's a hell of a lot to ask when Russia's invading your country.
Exactly right. Like you said, they have to hold up an image, and this fake masculine image, which we have globally, that means this guy is going to go through some serious stuff. And the real problem is, and I've seen this in my country, our leaders are traumatized and making decisions on how to move forward from a trauma perspective. They're not at all grounded.
Israel, for sure. Yeah, you see that in Israel. You see that with the British politicians that have gone through the public school system. Well, Boris Johnson's met him, so I probably should now. So if anyone knows him, get me out there. I didn't worry my family enough, obviously, when I was in Lviv, so it's probably time for Kiev next. So Kiev, I should pronounce it properly.
Really interesting, Mark, and could possibly work, is if somebody proposed that they're going to do trauma therapy with this guy every day to make sure he stays grounded. The country is well aware enough of trauma. And if they maybe change the word therapy, but trauma-informed decision-making or something like that, their whole country would get behind that. And do you know what a public image that would be? Is I'm going to make decisions based from a grounded, rational place. I think people would love that.
Yeah, we'll put it on social media, we'll crowdsource it and sort it out. So if anyone wants to lead with that, want to get us in, Zelensky's actually apparently very cool with social media and very down with a lot of young sort of modern things. Right. So if anyone's open to it as a leader, he might be. So very cool. Okay, David, you're a star. Amazing to talk to you. Just lovely to have someone. There's not that many people in the world that can relate to sort of therapy in war zones, So I really do appreciate your time personally, and very up to the minute conversation. In terms of TRE, where do people go? I've got several of your books, but other than the books, what would you recommend for people?
I'll just go to the website. David-Berceli is my personal website, but the TRE website is traumaprevention.com. They can go to both of those and get whatever information they want.
David, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Mark. You take care.